And so, I was born. The first people I remember seeing were the old man, the old lady, and their daughter, Heather. After they'd said hello, the old man powered me down so he could install some software. I could tell they were nice people. The old man didn't give me a silly voice or stupid personality. And the old lady didn't dress me like a clown. Although for some reason, Heather really didn't like me. Once I'd had time to get used to walking, the old man asked me to dash from one end of the room to the other. Next, the old man spent a couple of hours building some wooden platforms. He said he wanted me to jump up them, but I must admit, I was scared. It wasn't until I saw Heather and her mother happily climbing up them that I decided it might be okay. The old man then rearranged the platforms. He told me to try to reach the other end of the room without touching the floor. Heather said the floor's made of lava, but when I smiled at her, she just frowned and looked away. The old lady arranged some pillows and blankets. She said it was in case I fell, but I think she just wanted it to look more like lava. When I reached the other side, the old man just smiled and said, "That'll do, for now." A couple of days after those first lessons, the family had a big meal, and I was introduced to everyone else. The professor was the old man's brother. He was very quiet, and always seemed to just kind of stare at me. He had lived with the old man for 5 years. The house was so huge they barely saw each other. He preferred instead to stay in his room, leaving everything up to his butler, Mr. Deck, as he insisted everyone call him, although the professor always called him Anton. For a while, he called me a yellow bastard, but the old man made him stop, as he thought it sounded racist. Mr. Silton was the old man's driver. Before he worked here, he'd gotten in with some bad people and was the driver in a post office robbery, although it all went wrong for some reason. Mr. Silton showed me a video of his band. I'm sure some people must like it, but I just found it terrifying. Then there was Alice. She was the cook. She was a nice old lady. When she was younger, she had been a TV chef. Then, years later, she had a small part in Coronation Street. Mr. Silton said, before she worked for the old man, Alice was quite a hoarder. She kept old newspapers and bicycles, and something about a poo in a shoebox. The next morning, the old man gathered everyone together to show them what I was capable of. "What else does he do?" asked Mr. Silton. The old man smiled. "He can help around the house." "Could he help me with my newspaper collecting?" asked Alice. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," said the old lady, "but he can do all sorts of jobs." "Yeah," said Mr. Silton, "shove a stick up his ass and he can do Deck's job." Now, said the old man, "we have company," pointing to some important-looking people. Two large men, both called Gary, set up what the old man referred to as lasers. He said again, I should try to get from one end of the room to the other, but I shouldn't be worried, as I had a special chip which meant no matter how damaged I was, I couldn't die. He said it was like infinite lives in a video game. but when he realized I didn't understand, he said he would explain another time. Everybody clapped, except the important-looking men. "Not exactly a cold, calculated killer, is it?" said the man in black. The man in grey laughed. "What kind of artificial intelligence was that?" he asked. "Move right, unless there's something in the way." Okay, said the old man. He turned to me and whispered, "They're going to make it quite a bit tougher. But I'm sure you'll be fine." The Garys then rearranged the room one last time. The old man smiled. Now, there's no need to look so glum," he said. "I'm still happy with everything you've done today." So this time, I was determined to do him proud. The old man's friends actually seemed quite happy when I made it through. "We might have a winner after all," said the man in black. "It's no Killbot 3000, but you can almost see the fire in its eyes." A couple of days later, the old lady said she had a surprise for me, my own room. She also wanted to play me some music. I wasn't sure after what Mr. Silton had shown me. As if music wasn't amazing enough, the old lady then bought me a television set. I couldn't believe what I saw. I watched everything I could. Comedy, drama, horror, sci-fi. Anything anyone wanted to watch I would happily watch with them. Then one day, the old man set up a small box. He plugged some cables into the television and said, "This is what I meant when I said video games." I played games at every chance I could. I took on everyone. I was unstoppable. I had enjoyed music, film, and television. But to me, video games really were the highest art form. Heather's birthday was a couple of months later. Her mum and dad had bought her a camera and arranged a day out by the sea so that Heather could take some photos, although I really don't think she wanted any pictures of me. When the old man asked the professor if he wanted to go, he frowned and said, "I can't believe you want to spend time with that thing. It could destroy the world." I wasn't sure what he meant, but the old man just smiled and said, "That's what you said about the Game Boy. Anton, how about you?" "I don't think so," said Mr. Deck. "The last time I got in that car, Barry crashed us into a branch of Woolworths. I never would have gone into Woolworths of my own accord." The old man explained that the car was old and the brakes had failed, but Mr. Deck was having none of it. So Mr. Silton drove, and Alice came along for the fresh air. I enjoyed being outside. Although, the old lady kept telling me to be careful of the rickety old walkways. It felt like she was telling me off, but I think she was just concerned. As the old man and I stood on the cliff tops, I could see something in the distance. I wasn't sure what it was, so I asked the old man. He said it was a battleship that had sunk in the 1940s. But he looked so sad when he spoke about war. I didn't see what happened, but the metal platform Heather was climbing on had collapsed. She was safe, even if the rocks she was on looked very dangerous. The tide was rising, and we didn't know how long the Coast Guard was going to be, so I offered to climb down and get her. The old man agreed, but said I should be careful, as Heather doesn't have infinite lives. like I do. Heather was unconscious, and her leg was broken, so I picked her up as gently as I could. I decided it would be best if I didn't run the rest of the way. An ambulance had arrived by the time I had made it back to the cliff top. The medics made sure Heather was okay, and then took her off to hospital. A few days later, we all went to see how she was doing. She was fine, but would have to wear the cast for a couple of months. Once Heather got to know me, we became good friends. We enjoyed the same films and TV. She was also annoyingly good at some of my favorite games. After a while, she became very interested in how I worked. Soon she knew as much about me as the old man did, if not more. We spent the next couple of months visiting other countries, as when it came to teaching me things, the old man always liked to pick interesting locations. He had explained the basics of mathematics to me at the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Taught me history in the dead of night, surrounded by mysterious giant stones. And even showed me science in action high up in a hot air balloon. This is why I was surprised when the old man took me to a restaurant. It was nice, but it seemed very somber compared to the previous grand locations. He said he just wanted to chat, and this was nice and quiet. Plus it was his favorite place to eat. We talked about life, the universe, Douglas Adams, everything really. When I asked him why were we here, why did we exist, he just smiled and said, "Life is like a game, just don't expect to be finished anytime soon." When I looked puzzled, he said, "Well, everyone should have a purpose." So I asked him, "What's my purpose?" He thought for a bit, then said, "So you want to be a real boy?" Which just confused me even more. Eventually the old man said, "For now, I want you to help clean things around the house." I must have looked unimpressed, as he then said, "Okay, I want you to clean 1,000,000 things." It didn't sound like the meaning of life, but I suppose you've got to start somewhere. The next day, the old man said he wanted to install some more software, so he powered me down. When I came to, he said Mr. Silton had a joke for me, and that I should pull his finger. I don't think I got the joke. So the old man powered me down again. This time when I pulled Mr. Silton's finger, I got the joke. But it wasn't very funny. The old man then explained that he had installed a special chip which allowed me to clean away anything that was broken. He said it also tells me how many things are nearby, and how many smaller things are in a bigger thing. It all sounded very complicated, but he said all I really had to do was pause, and it would bring up all the information I needed. He then said he wanted me to find and clean all of the items in the room. He told me there would be some chains to climb, but that would be nice and easy, as I just had to press up. He then finished by saying, when I had collected all the items, I should come back here. The old man then asked the old lady Heather and I to follow him outside. I was happy too, as it was a lovely hot day. The old man said he was worried that Alice had been hoarding again. She had filled up a small barn with old bicycles and newspapers. Heather said, this would be a perfect chance to properly test my new powers. The old man thought for a second, then said, using the steptoe chip, I should find and clean at least 300 things. When we explained to Alice what we wanted to do, she seemed scared. But after the old lady kindly explained that, well, the barn was starting to smell, she said it would be okay. One last thing, said the old man. If you want to use a door, just push up. When I was about to enter the old barn, Mr. Silton said he had seen some mushrooms growing inside. He asked me to give him any that I found. He then winked, but I wasn't sure why. The old man was very happy with everything that I had cleaned, but I think Mr. Silton was even more happy with his mushrooms. It wasn't the days getting shorter, or the evenings getting colder. It was the falling leaves that really made me feel sad. As we watched the trees blowing in the breeze, the old lady said, the leaves must fall before the blossom comes. She had already explained the seasons to me, so for once, I actually understood. But it didn't make me feel any better. The old lady obviously had enough of my moping, and said, right, next week we're going to have a party. For some reason she insisted that we were all going to wear costumes. Heather was very excited and said, I've got some perfect ideas. It was terrifying. Everyone was dressed like someone else. I think I was meant to be some kind of pumpkin, as everyone kept shouting, it's the great pumpkin. Still, at least Mr. Silton was having fun telling everyone his joke. And I suppose Heather's costume was quite flattering. After what seemed like forever, everybody left, and things got back to normal. Heather was allowed to watch a scary film before she went to bed, but I had to help Alice and Mr. Deck clean up.
Coming to get you, Barbara.
I wasn't happy about this, but the old man said if I was quick, then I could watch the end of the film with them.
You're acting like a child.
Alice was vacuuming, and Mr. Deck was taking down the decorations, so I thought I should clean up the plates and glasses. The ear-splitting sound was the fire alarm. As usual, Mr. Deck blamed Mr. Silton, saying he was probably smoking one of his jazz cigarettes. But then the professor appeared. He said that there was something burning in the kitchen. Alice looked confused, saying that she hadn't cooked anything since the morning. We were all surprised when Mr. Deck opened the oven. Inside was a large black cloak and a slightly burnt pair of men's underwear. Suddenly the old lady burst in. She looked terrified. She kept shouting, "There's someone on the roof." When we went outside, it slowly became obvious that it was Mr. Silton. He was completely naked and playing his guitar. he shouted down. When I finish this song, I'm going to fly. The old lady said, "Oh my God, I know this one, there's only about 30 seconds left." The old man then quickly turned to me and said, "You know what to do." By the time I had made it up to the roof, Mr. Silton was beside the edge. I tried to calm him down, but he was acting even more bizarre than usual. After an hour or so, Mr. Silton was fine. He said he had eaten some bad magic mushrooms. Part of me wondered why he hadn't doubled in size. Still, he was soon laughing and joking with the paramedics. One of them said he looked like the world's worst clown. I don't think Mr. Silton liked that, so he told his own joke. But that just made the other paramedic call him Marshmallow Marceau. I don't think he liked that either, but at least he was still in one piece. A month or so later, Heather and I were playing video games, when the old man said he wanted me to come outside. He said it had been a year since I had arrived, so he had a present for me. He placed the teddy bear high up on a wooden platform. He then told me I should try to pick it up. Try as I might, I couldn't reach the teddy bear. However, I still don't understand what happened next. Was I dead? Was this heaven? It sort of looked like the basement bathroom. It was the shoes the old man was going to give me. I thought I might as well put them on. They were just the right size. The old man's hat fit me pretty good as well. I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I wore it. Amazingly, the shoes allowed me to defy gravity. Or maybe it was the hat. The screaming was coming from one of the bedrooms, but the stairs were blocked by a wall of fire. The people screaming turned out to be a man, a woman, and their children. They were confused and terrified. At first the man looked like he was ready to fight me, but after I convinced them that I was there to help, he calmed down. There was no way I could carry them all at once, so the children went first. I dropped the children off at the front door and promised them that I would be back with their parents. The fire was getting much worse, so the woman went next. When we got to the front door, all the woman said was, "Thank you, please hurry." I couldn't leave, not while people were in trouble. By the time I managed to get back, the man was unconscious. I had to pick him up quickly, as I could tell the house was going to collapse at any moment. I helped the family set up a tent so they had somewhere to stay. The kids were excited as they got to camp outside, but I think they knew they had just lost their home. When I mentioned my quest to clean a million things, the man said I should look through the rubble of the house, as they had no use for it. So, when everyone was making dinner, I looked through the wreckage. There wasn't anything I could clean, but to my astonishment, I found a TV set and a games console. With a bit of fiddling I was able to get them to work. So I sat playing games with the kids until their parents said it was bedtime. As we talked, the man opened a bottle of wine. I asked what had happened, why was everything so ruined? The man looked at the woman, then the woman sighed and said, "There was a war." "Yes, a war," said the man. "One side of the planet attacked the other, and before we knew, it was all over. Everything gone. Everything destroyed." "Well, it's late," said the woman. "We should really get some sleep. Help yourself to anything you need, and we'll see you tomorrow." In the morning, I asked the man if he knew what had caused the fire that had destroyed their house. The man smiled. "Crap old house, bad wiring, constant electrical surges from the unreliable power plant, take your pick." He said, if we had the money, we'd move to the mainland. But we can barely feed ourselves, let alone buy a new house, so for now we're left here with the rest of the scum. But he did say I should head to the mainland, as there would be plenty there for me to clean, and a better quality of rubbish. The man said, "Before the war, my lovely wife used to be a fisherman." "Fisherwoman? Fishing person?" "I used to catch fish," interrupted the woman, "and, seeing as you saved us all from the fiery end, maybe you would like to borrow my boat to get to the mainland." I was a little scared, but then they gave me some captain software and I was an old salty sea dog within minutes. I was surprised to see an old man, but not as surprised as he was. It turned out he was blind. He was kneeling on the floor with his hand in a drain. When I asked him what he was doing, he said his cat had crawled into the pipes, and he was trying to get her out. He was very happy when I offered to help. He said there was no way we could reach her from here, so if I was willing, I could make my way through the sewers and get her from the other end. He said he would turn off the water for as long as possible, but I would have to run, as the pipes would soon fill up again. I happily agreed. So he gave me a key. He said this will open all the sewer gates. Go through here, then down the ladder, and through the big door at the bottom. I found the old man's cat. She was fine, if a little confused. I was horrified. It looked like me, but it shambled around like something from the film we watched on Halloween. The man was happy to have his cat back. He looked so content with her sat on his lap. I told him about the thing I saw, but he just laughed and said, "Those bastard robots, they're always getting up through the pipes. Don't worry though, it'll never get through the big doors. If I had my way, we'd have blown up the lot of them when we had the chance." I wasn't sure what he meant, but I decided now wouldn't be the best time to tell him I was a robot. The man laughed and said, "Don't worry, I know who you are," and told me that he knew the old man. As we chatted, the man brewed himself some tea. He said that he had worked for the old man. In fact, he had lost his sight in one of the old man's factories. Strangely, he smiled at this thought. "He always did me right," he said. "When I had my accident, the old man said he would look after me. And he did. He always made sure I had enough money, and he let me move into this old pumping station on his land. Which reminds me, I have something here for you." He rummaged around behind a cupboard. Then he continued saying, "The old man wanted you to have this when you were old enough, but fate wouldn't allow it." He passed me a large box. It was empty. I thought about pretending to be excited, but the man said, "Wait a minute, it's empty, isn't it?" He slumped back in his chair. "I was robbed a few months ago," he said, almost in a whisper. "It's strange, they took practically anything metal, but left loads of food and a brand new saxophone." The man looked sad, so I thought I would try to change the subject. I told him about my quest to clean a million things. This at least made him smile. He said I was welcome to go back through the pipes anytime I wanted, as there were loads of old things in there that could be cleaned away. I took the fisherman's boat to the mainland. The fisherman was right. Everything was in pieces. Everything had been destroyed. I docked the boat in some ruins. They must have once been a town. I was confronted by a lovable fat old dog. He almost looked pleased to see me. Suddenly, 3 men appeared holding large guns. Or at least 2 men and what looked to be a pregnant woman. Incredibly, it was Mr. Silton. "I thought you'd been shut down," he said. "I mean, it's been years." "I'm not really sure what happened," I replied. I then told him about me cleaning a million things. He laughed and said, "Nothing changes." He then showed me into what was surprisingly a really nice house. "Please excuse my husband," said the pregnant lady. "I'm Edwina, but everyone calls me Eddie. I believe you know this idiot. And that's Preston. We've met." said the small man. "It was me that delivered that thing, remember? All you used to deliver was weed," mumbled Mr. Silton as he put the dog dish on the floor. "And I was there that night, when this twat was off his face on mushrooms. Thanks for letting me and the dog stay, by the way." "Yeah, well, we like the dog," said Mrs. Silton. "And I suppose I've got you to thank for us meeting. What were you giving Barry those dodgy magic mushrooms?" She pulled out an old photograph. It was one that Heather had taken the night I had saved Mr. Silton. It reminded me of everyone else, so I asked what had happened to them. Mr. Silton said Alice had a small place in the countryside. The professor had holed up in one of the old man's factories. Mr. Deck was, believe it or not, now a presenter on the only state television channel. And Heather and her mother lived on a government compound where they both worked. I asked about the old man, surprised that Mr. Silton hadn't mentioned him. He's dead," said Mr. Silton. "Sorry, I thought you knew." "Anyway," said Mr. Preston, "I thought you said that robot thing found the mushrooms for you, in that Hoarder's manky old barn." Mr. Silton looked embarrassed. "Well," said Mrs. Silton, "I guess we've got you to thank for getting us together then." "Time for bed, I think," said Mr. Silton. "Make yourself comfy, and we'll see you in the morning." The next day, I thought it might be a good time to ask about the war. Judging by the look on everyone's faces, it wasn't. "Well, the war," said Mr. Silton. "Barry," interrupted his wife, "can I see you for a minute?" and dragged Mr. Silton out of the room, leaving me with Mr. Preston. All of a sudden, Mr. Silton appeared. "How about a tune-up?" he said. Mrs. Silton started to make some food, and Mr. Preston was playing with the dog, leaving me to chat with Mr. Silton. I said that I really wanted to see everyone else, but Mr. Silton said that it wouldn't be that easy. Traveling now, especially for a robot, is complicated. Go back to the house, you could even do some cleaning. Wait there and I'll work out a way to get you to each of them. I told him that I couldn't get into the main house because the hallway ceiling had collapsed. "I have just the thing," said Mr. Silton, as he pulled some sort of card out of his pocket. "If you can get into the caves under the church next door to the house, you can use this security pass to get into the old man's laboratories. You can get into the main house that way." I was so excited I would be able to get back into my old room. I said thanks, and made my way to the front door. "Also, I think you might be able to help us out," said Mr. Silton, But we'll meet up back at the old man's house in a couple of days. You head there and we'll see you soon. I took the fisherman's boat to the old man's estate. As I walked through the old church ruins, I was surprised to hear Mr. Silton calling me. He said he had forgotten to give me something, and the church's community hall would be the perfect place to try it out. As soon as we walked into the hall, Mr. Silton said he had a present for me. It was a pair of Atlas gloves. They made me think of the old blind man with the cat, and his stolen Atlas gloves. I wonder if Mr. Silton knew how lucky he was to still have them with a glove thief around. Mr. Silton asked me to try the gloves on and start chucking things around. But not him. He was very clear about that. Mr. Silton suggested we clean the hall. Of course I knew when he said we, he meant me. But I was happy to try out my new gloves. He said I should clear everything off of the basketball court and put the things on the floor either side. I fiddled with the settings for a bit, but when Mr. Silton saw I was having trouble, he produced a small manual. He explained that pressing down and Y would pick the thing up. Y would then throw the thing, and if I wanted to place it on the floor, I should again press down and Y. He looked more and more confused as he read all this. But eventually he finished by saying, "Well, I hope that made more sense to you than it did to me." Next, Mr. Silton suggested we make it a real game and see how quickly I could score 10 baskets. I enjoyed this so much. It felt just like the good old days. Except Mr. Silton wasn't as forgiving as the old man. When I'd scored 10 baskets, Mr. Silton gave me what he called a high five. He said I now knew everything about the gloves and I should be able to continue through the basement of the church into the house. When I asked him if he was coming with me, he just laughed and said they would catch up with me in the main hall. The door was exactly as Mr. Silton had described it. I just hoped that the card he had given me was the security key and not just some backstage pass. Well, it opened the door, but soon an alarm went off. Something caught my eye. It was a small yellow sphere. The book next to it explained that it was a shield that would automatically take a hit for me when activated. The X button took the shield in and out of storage, meaning I could save it for when the going got tough. It seemed that I started with 2 slots to carry shields, but I could upgrade to be able to carry more. If both I and the shield died in the same room, the Lazarus chip would bring us both back. It's almost as if the shield needed its sacrifice to mean something. It felt like a true friend, proving that even the simplest of faces can bring out an emotional reaction. Something literally caught my eye. I remembered the old man had installed some software that helped show me things that were interactive, and how to interact with them. This must be what he was talking about. The video recorder's blinking light caught my eye. It must have been years since I had seen a film or TV show. Maybe I could take a little break from my quest and watch the film on the tape. As the video started, I was surprised to see the old man. Hello, hello, he bellowed in his familiar tone. This is test number, 107C. He continued as he read from a clipboard. This unit still has 3 major issues. 1. The shell is so incredibly thick that the whole machine is still far too large and heavy. 2. The missile system is too unpredictable and aggressive. And 3. The trade-off between power and intelligence is far too great. I think the military capabilities would be far too dangerous in the wrong hands. I think we would be best to push forward with the Innocence Project. I didn't really understand a word of what he said, and I was slightly disappointed that he had recorded over the film, but it was nice to see the old man's face again. Seeing another VCR made me wonder if there were any more recordings of the old man. I rummaged behind the TV, and was not surprised to find 2 more dusty old tapes. One just had hours of some strange sport. But the other had a recording of the old man. Hello, hello, came his voice again. Right, this is urgent. Cancel the nanobot program immediately. All production to be stopped. Contain the remaining units in these corrosion-proof canisters. Although I'm sure it's obvious, the old man continued. We have discovered that they are essentially unstoppable and can form a controlling intelligence around any object. Need I say more? Well, at least that explained why everything moved with minds of their own. I'd never been in this part of the house before, but I figured I would get back to more familiar surroundings once I made it through these laboratories. Knock, knock, chuckled Mr. Silton. It's all right, we'll claim it on the insurance as accidental damage. Get me a new TV as well. I explained to them that I had found some of the old man's home videos, and the contents had shocked me. The dirty old bugger, interrupted Mr. Silton. But I didn't know what he meant, so I continued explaining about the nanobots, and Mr. Silton said we needed to get our sharpest minds on the case. Not you dipshit, he barked at Mr. Preston, we need to rescue Heather and her mum. I wasn't sure what Mr. Silton meant by rescue, but I thought I would leave them to clear up. The weather felt cold and ominous as we made our way back outside. Before we meet the others, I need you to help me get my stolen van back, explained Mr. Silton. It's going to be dangerous, and we need someone dependable. The equipment was heavy, but I was happy to help pack the large boxes until Preston returned with what Mr. Silton called the mean machine. Mr. Preston seemed even more anxious than usual. At first I thought he just needed to use a toilet, but Mr. Silton explained that their old gang members lived around here. Somehow the money went missing when we robbed that post office, he continued. For some reason they thought we'd taken it, but, as he put it, why would we live in such a dump if we had a load of money? Although this clarified things for me, it certainly didn't calm Mr. Preston, who suggested we gotta move on. Don't worry, we'll be a matter of minutes. We just need to send Mr. Chips up there to have a look, said Mr. Silton as he pointed to a window high up the building. Go on, he said with a smile. Off you go then. The man didn't look like a thief, but maybe his striped jumper was in the wash. Mr. Silton was certain he'd stolen the van though, so I watched for a moment. But then I heard Mr. Silton climbing up. I was going to speak, but Mr. Silton held a finger up to his lips. He looked incredibly serious for a moment. One swift movement, and we were inside. Mr. Silton whispered that I was to go one way while he went another. Why are you whispering? I asked him. Where are we going? Find the keys to my van, Robocop, said Mr. Silton through gritted teeth. As soon as I heard the gunshot, I knew I needed to go back and find Mr. Silton. The old man was pointing an even older gun right at Mr. Silton's face. But the man looked terrified when he saw me. I can still picture his hand shaking as he reloaded his ancient firearm. This wasn't the plan, shouted Mr. Silton. It's him or me. Let him have it. I kept turning the events over in my mind. Could I have handled things differently? Could I save Mr. Silton without hurting that man? Mr. Preston could see I was upset, and said music was a good alternative to facing up to problems. Come with me, he insisted. I'm going to teach you how to play drums. First, he said, just play the bass drum along with me. We'll see how good your timing is. Mr. Silton was patched up, but still pretty angry. He referred to the man as a word that wasn't in my dictionary file. It should have been between cunning and cup. I reminded Mr. Silton about going to find the others now we had the van. But he said there was something even more important we had to do first. Mr. Silton explained that it was a good idea that Mr. Logan be released from prison early, and that this wouldn't involve a parole board but might involve dynamite. Straight away I was apprehensive. I thought only bad people went to prison. I knew Mr. Logan was the guitarist in Mr. Silton's band, but why would we help a bad person? In the end, I think it was only Mrs. Silton's smile that convinced me to help. Mrs. Silton promised to have a present for us when we got back. She said she'd been saving her money from her decorating job. I didn't know what I would need money for, but then realized, if nothing else, new games consoles must be out. Be careful, said Mrs. Silton with a big smile. Don't rob any post offices, and don't get shot. In the dead of night, it was surprisingly easy to get close to the prison building. Mr. Silton said it was like the Death Star and had a weakness we could exploit. Although I seem to remember the robot getting shot when they did that in the film. But there was no time to worry as Mr. Silton pressed a walkie-talkie into my hand and said, "Good luck." Unsurprisingly, Mr. Logan's cell was locked, but, thanks to my speedy brain, I was able to hack it in seconds. Mr. Logan was not pleased to see me. No one ever was. But I couldn't work out why. However, when I mentioned Mr. Silton, he soon cheered up. We quickly made our way outside. Although I wasn't sure about Mr. Logan's stealth techniques, they were quite different from mine. But someone must have noticed Mr. Logan was missing, as, with a bright flash, we were soon attacked. This still wasn't the plan, said Mr. Silton as he insisted he was okay, and that, no, I didn't need to clean up the trail of blood. He did however urge me to take care of the huge tank bearing down on us. We all piled into the van. Mr. Logan and Mr. Preston took out large guns as Mr. Silton gave me some driving software. It basically explained that one foot pump made the van go, and the other one signaled Mr. Logan and Preston to fire their guns. I hoped that all the bullets fired led to non-fatal wounds, but statistically that was incredibly unlikely. Strangely, I felt too excited and relieved to care. Mr. Silton winced as he clutched his bleeding shoulder and explained how you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. I think broken eggs meant dead people. Sometimes, he said, you have to do whatever it takes to survive, even if that means killing.
But not innocent people,
said Mr. Logan as he stared straight ahead. Eventually, I asked Mr. Logan what he had done to end up in prison, but he just continued staring out of the window. Mr. Preston smiled as he said, I suppose someone should explain. He told me when the war started, he and Mr. Silton had avoided conscription, but Mr. Logan was called up. His unit's first orders were to sweep through a huge urban area, killing anything that moved. The only trouble was, hundreds of refugees had recently taken shelter there. The generals knew that those people were there, said Mr. Preston, but they couldn't have cared less.
This isn't the time for another one of your conspiracy theories,
interrupted Mr. Silton. Although this obviously annoyed Mr. Preston, he continued explaining how Mr. Logan and another man deserted, and, after a poor attempt to hide in a wooden vaulting horse, the pair of them were caught at gunpoint on a train, whilst trying to speak rudimentary German. Mr. Logan guided us down a small side street as Mr. Preston complained that he needed the toilet. Mr. Silton asked why we were taking the scenic route while he was trying not to bleed to death. But Mr. Logan gave Mr. Silton a quick glance. You're fine, he said with the faintest of smiles. Soon the night sky was full of twinkling stars, and I was able to impress everyone with my navigation skills. The software was state-of-the-art, but I remember Heather telling me how the ancients had used the stars in much the same way. It always made me smile, thinking about the names she gave the constellations. It was the middle of the night by the time we got back, but Mrs. Silton was still up waiting for us. Really, again, in the same place, was all she said as she shook her head and tended to Mr. Silton's second bullet wound. Mr. Preston nearly knocked us over as he sprinted towards the bathroom. It appeared that his body had kept on making urine, even though it didn't have anywhere left to store it. I asked Mr. Silton about Heather and the old lady, but he said he was just about to wash his hair. When I asked him again later, he said the main thing was that we'd got Logan and the van back, and couldn't the rest wait until I had cleaned up the band room for him. I didn't know what to say. Everything we had done, everything I had helped him with, I thought it was all to get everyone back together. But now I didn't know what to think. Before I could say anything, Mrs. Silton explained that it was okay if I only travelled on trains and was alone. I must have looked worried as Mrs. Silton smiled and continued, "If you really want these idiots to go with you, they can disguise themselves and catch the next train after you." Mr. Silton was dismissive, and said I'd get nowhere without proper ID. "They'll be stopping robots for even the tiniest of things," he said. "And a robot passport costs a fortune these days." "Well," said Mrs. Silton, "it's a good job I've got this." Mr. Silton looked confused and asked where Mrs. Silton got the money. "Sometimes," said Mrs. Silton, "when God slams a door in your face and shoots you twice in the shoulder, he opens a window." Mrs. Silton explained how Preston had given her the extra money. He said there was good money to be made selling pills and powder to people that distracted them from the world being an absolute mess.
"Bedtime,"
said Mr. Logan as he carried his guitar into his room. Everyone else left one by one, leaving me stroking the dog. I awoke to the sound of Mrs. Silton making herself some breakfast. It felt very early, but I suppose it was just that we had gotten so late. Mrs. Silton gulped down her coffee, and with a reassuring smile she said, "Let's do this." Train tickets cost $1,000. So Mrs. Silton said I should trade in some of the things I'd cleaned so I could afford to travel. However, when we tried the door, it was apparent that the junkyard owner wouldn't be back for a while. So Mrs. Silton suggested I try to earn some money by other means. She said there were plenty of jobs in the town that a robot could do. The largest of the old ladies explained the job to me. I would be drying plates. She explained that old people couldn't afford to retire anymore, so she and her friends had to take menial jobs. All of the old ladies would be throwing plates at me as quickly as they could. I just had to catch and dry them. The rickety old door led into some kind of drinking establishment. But the bartender soon made it clear that, as he put it, they didn't serve my kind here, and that I would have to wait outside. The foreman explained the job to me. I would be making bricks. The world needed rebuilding and these bricks would more than help. He said I would be on the end of the production line and would be shaping the final parts of the bricks. All I had to do was hit the brick in time with everyone else. The post lady explained the job to me. I would be sorting parcels. Many people were now separated by desolate battlefields and needed these care packages to survive. The parcels were either red or blue. I just had to stamp the right ones, with the right color, at the right time. Cold specks of rain began to fall as I stepped off the train onto the deserted platform. The station looked as if it hadn't been used in years. There were no conductors, no ticket barriers, not even an up-to-date timetable. The place was like a ghost town.
This is Infiltrating.
The security system jumped to life. I knew the only way I could deactivate it was to destroy its power source. That's when I spotted a perfect shiny surface. Maybe I could deflect one of the lasers toward the generator. Mr. Silton and the others arrived and changed out of their disguises. Although Mr. Preston was moaning as apparently Mrs. Silton had only washed his and Mr. Logan's Halloween costumes. A large piece of machinery blocked our path. Mr. Silton smiled when I asked what we should do next. I knew straight away that he didn't mean Mr. Preston or Mr. Logan when he said, "Someone's gonna have to climb inside." It seemed we could use the computer to move chunks of the machine around. I knew I needed to make a clear path, as it would be me that would be going through it. As we entered the extravagant corridor, the most beautiful tune played in the distance. But almost as soon as we began to enjoy its dulcet tones, the music stopped, dead. The professor was dead, but everything seemed wrong. He was old, very old, maybe 20 years older than when I'd last seen him. Mr. Silton sounded very sad when he said, "How did anyone even get in here? I don't know what to do now. I suppose we'll head back to the train station." It was hard to believe the professor was gone. Although he was always suspicious of me, I was sad to think I'd never see him again. "Is it? Yes, it is. This is the right day," said the professor as he jabbed at a small metal box. "I don't know how much time I've got to explain," he continued as a bright light began to surround everyone. "Oh, not long at all. We had reappeared just as smoothly as we had left, but we were somewhere very different. Mr. Preston and Mr. Logan were speechless, but the professor just continued studying his box. Looking back, I suppose I was rather stupid, as I ended up chasing a beautiful butterfly. I was lost, but soon I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. After literally 10 minutes of Mr. Preston and Mr. Logan saying "whoa" and "dude," the professor began to explain, "Time travel, if I can find the correct point in time, then I should be able to, well, make things better." "I suppose it's like we're in that excellent movie," chuckled Mr. Logan. "Back to the Future?" replied Mr. Preston. "No, that excellent movie. Back to the Future 2? Time Bandits? Time Cop? Terminator? Groundhog Day? Groundhog Day? Groundhog Day?" The box let out a loud bleep as the professor gave it a heavy thump. This damn thing's so dependent on the maths used to calculate where the Earth is at any one point in time and space, that it's almost random where we'll end up, or even how long the time window will stay open. That last one was the shortest I've had yet. Although obviously apprehensive of our situation, I think Mr. Preston and Mr. Logan were too excited to really pay attention. But they were far less excited when I asked what his longest stay was, and the professor replied, about 15 years. I was stranded in ancient Egypt for so long. They had me build them a steam-powered robot. You should have seen the things they had it build. Yes, wonderful things. It was like I was Thoth incarnate, or the modern Prometheus. Speaking of which, robot, have a look around, see if you can find anything to make a fire. As great as my shoes were, they weren't much use when there was nothing for them to stick to. I rolled deep into the cave, but at least I had found the professor some firewood. Now I just needed to get back to everybody else. Everybody warmed themselves by the fire. In the orangey glow, the cave even looked a little homely. Mr. Logan was much more comfortable now that he could see his surroundings, but Mr. Preston kept saying, "We're in bloody dinosaur times." The professor laughed. He pointed out that there was 65 million years between dinosaurs and the emergence of man. But that just made Mr. Preston panic about possible dinosaur ghosts. I got the feeling Mr. Logan had heard this kind of talk before, as he sighed when he said, "Oh, I suppose you believe in ghosts as well now, do you?" "Well, yeah," said Mr. Preston. "Barry's missus says this bloke who works with her uncle reckons his brother saw one. Fact." And with that, he began to tell the most amazing story I had ever heard. He explained how there was a man traveling through the Black Wall Tunnel who saw a young motorcyclist stood by a smashed-up motorbike. The man stopped, so the motorcyclist told him an address, but when he got in the back of the car, he fell silent, clearly in shock. "This isn't a ghost story," interrupted Mr. Logan. "This is called giving someone a lift." Mr. Preston was annoyed. Mr. Logan's stupid joke had ruined his train of thought. The brother of a bloke who works with Mrs. Silton's uncle gave a young motorcyclist a lift after a crash outside the Black Wall Tunnel. I said, just happy to be part of the conversation. "Yeah, that's it," said Mr. Preston as he explained that when the man arrived at the address, the motorcyclist had vanished. He said the man, not knowing what else to do, knocked on the door of the house. Soon an old lady answered, and when the man asked her if she had a son, she burst out crying and sobbed, "I did have, but he died 10 years ago today. Just outside the Black Wall Tunnel." I couldn't believe my audio sensors. This was concrete proof of the afterlife. I mean, Mr. Logan did point out that the story was from a children's TV show called Grange Hill, but you can't argue with the facts. Soon, the professor had finished inputting whatever data his box needed. "Robot," he said, "we need to be outside for my computations to be truly accurate. Find us an exit from this platonic allegory." The cave. Find us a way out. "Well, I've reversed the polarity of the neutron flow, so, here we go," said the professor as the glowing light surrounded us again. "This is it," said the professor as he looked around. "Oh no," he gasped as his expression became far more serious. "It's the wrong time." We had appeared in another barren desert. I was beginning to think that the past was made of nothing but sand. The professor looked concerned as he examined his box. It was then that we realized we were completely surrounded. The men seemed to think I was some kind of god, or, as it turned out, some kind of sacrifice. As I got to the top of the cliff, I could see everyone else being led away in heavy chains. Their extravagantly dressed capturers were only moving them in a slow march, so I followed them at a safe distance. Strangely, the men seemed to ask the professor something, who nodded in agreement. Although they clearly knew each other, the man in charge pushed the professor into a small wooden cage, along with Preston and Logan. The men then left. I was about to attempt to free my friends when one of the men returned with some tools. It was then I heard some machinery start in the distance, and the man left again. I then found out what the machinery was. Mr. Preston took a chance to do something I'm guessing he thought was brave, shouting, "Catch you later, you ancient Egyptian dickweeds." "This looks right."
Stay here,
whispered the professor, "just in case." "Sorry to take you on a less than excellent adventure," whispered the professor, his voice slowly weakening, "but I knew you needed to see these things. I was always worried about the military possibilities, but I'm pleased to see your consciousness software is still growing. Life is a state of mind." I had no idea what he meant, but he looked so happy.
"Quick!"
shouted Mr. Logan, "hide." I jumped into a large cupboard with Mr. Preston, who whispered something about seeing some people on the security monitor. The cupboard door was pretty thick, so I couldn't really hear what was going on, but suddenly I heard Mr. Silton shout, "Run!" When Mr. Preston eventually opened the door, we saw a large glowing light, exactly like the one from the professor's time machine. It was only then that I realized that we had reappeared just before we had left. As we walked back to the train station, Mr. Silton was truly confused. All he kept saying was, "What the bloody hell happened?" I was surprised to find Alice's house was a lot larger on the inside, and strangely, it lacked any color. Curiously, this was a ridiculous amount of stairs for such a small cottage. How strange everything was. I remember wondering if I had been changed in the night. Inside was a beautiful brightly colored field, but there was no way I could fit through such a tiny door. On the table was a large cake. I'd never eaten anything before, but for some reason I felt compelled to have a taste. Suddenly, a large glass bottle appeared. I don't know if it was all the growing that I had been doing, but I felt like I needed a drink. "Look who I found at the train station," said a distant voice. For some reason they were all dressed as wizards. "Oh my God," shouted the voice.
Stop!
Alice explained what was going on, while the man swiftly put my head back together. "And this is Simeon," said Alice. The man insisted I called him Sim, and apologized for attempting to hack my CPU.
Alice laughed and said, "Sorry."
Sim tends to sneeze whenever he's stressed or nervous. "I was worried you were like other robots. I'm glad you're okay though. I've had mixed results in the past." "This is Betty," said Sim, "and this idiot is Fluffers." "It's like they're our children," said Alice, "although it's strange, it was them that sort of found
Us.
And even before Sim had reprogrammed them, they were kind of nice to me. Betty even tried to clean up some of my rubbish." "So," said Mr. Silton, "the reason we're visiting is our little robot friend wants to see Heather and her mum again. Plus he tells me that there's some sort of problem with escaped nanobots in the old house." Alice looked puzzled. "What do you need me for then?" she said. "I'm assuming you've not broken the habit of a lifetime and thrown away Sim's security pass." Sim smirked at Alice. "It'll be here somewhere." Mr. Silton smiled. "Excellent," he said. "Then I presume you've still got that video camera you stole when you were working on Richard and Judy." Sim guided us down a set of basement stairs. "Well, thanks to Alice's quirky hobby," he sighed as he flicked the light on, "we've still got everything." Mr. Silton smiled. "Then," he said, "I think I've got a plan." Once I'd made my way out of the station, Mr. Silton and the others jogged up alongside me. As soon as they got the chance, they ducked into an alleyway to change their clothes. Mr. Silton was the first to change. "Dex Studios down that way," he said, "in that huge posh building, the British Corporation of Truth. The Corporation of Lies and Propaganda, a wretched hive of scum and villainy," said Mr. Preston. "And dancing competitions," said Mr. Silton. "There are some benches at the other end of the road. We'll wait there till the crew leave, then sneak in through one of the loading bays." While we walked, I asked how Mr. Deck had ended up back on television. Celebrities weren't very keen on walking down the red carpet at awards ceremonies with bombs falling from the skies, explained Mr. Silton. But they still craved attention and validation, so the solution was to host one big awards show in a giant underground bunker at Burlington. You can't broadcast from deep underground, so they had to run cables to the transmitter through a vent on the surface. A bomb-sized vent, as it turned out. It took a great shot. 1 in a million. The lack of survivors meant Z-listers like Deck were now the A-list by default. Just then, Mr. Logan interrupted, saying it was time to move. "Robots are allowed pretty much anywhere in the building as long as they look the part," whispered Mr. Silton. "You just need to be wearing no clothes, and have the blankest of faces." I didn't really like the sound of that, but I realized it was the only way I'd be able to get in. So I took off my suit and made my face blank. "Blanker," said Mr. Silton. "Blanker with an ER," said Mr. Silton again. "Well, I suppose that'll have to do." "Deck's dressing room is in some lavish suite," said Mr. Silton as Mr. Preston and Mr. Logan lowered me into the empty corridor below. "Have a look around," whispered Mr. Silton, "and we'll catch up with you in a bit." As I approached the group of people, a man in a white lab coat was demonstrating what he called the future of robotics. He said that anyone interested would be able to see it in action on one of the sound stages later today. "It's much better than these old models," he said as he stared at me. "My new version does exactly what you tell it to." No wonder people wanted to be on television so much. TV studios were full of video games. As soon as I entered Mr. Deck's dressing room, he shouted, "Get out!" I said, "I don't want to be disturbed." I was so shocked that I couldn't keep my blank face. Mr. Deck looked confused. "It's you, isn't it? Get away from me, you yellow bastard," he said as he reached for a huge red alarm button, but he was interrupted by Mr. Silton falling from a vent in the ceiling. "All right, Deck," smirked Mr. Silton. "Hello, Barry. And it's Mr. Deck if you don't mind," replied Mr. Deck as he hammered on the alarm button. "Quick," said Mr. Silton as he turned to me, "find a way to stop that alarm." There were 4 alarms left to turn off. A serious-looking security guard walked into the garden set, so I quickly approached him. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I had to keep him out of Mr. Deck's dressing room. I attempted to resume the blank face that Mr. Silton had shown me as I announced that Mr. Deck was not to be disturbed. For some reason I said it in an unusually high-pitched voice, which didn't seem helpful. The security guard's eyes narrowed. Now in a full panic, for some reason I decided this was a good moment to do the finger guns for the first time. The large man shoved me out of the way. But quick as a flash Mr. Logan had appeared and snapped his neck. "Sorry, had to be done," was all he said before running back toward Mr. Deck's room. "I didn't know you shredded the axe," said Mr. Logan as he placed an acoustic guitar into an ornate sarcophagus. "I don't," said Mr. Deck, "I got it for Elton John to sign." For once, everyone else looked as confused as I did. "We'll take this wine, and this portable TV," said Mr. Preston as he packed the coffin with as many expensive things he could find. "These bathrobes are pretty fancy as well." "Put those down," said Mr. Deck. "Elton John gave me those." "What's with you and Elton bloody John?" asked Mr. Silton, but Mr. Deck just looked angry. "Why are you doing this?" he said. "There's easier ways to get good wine and cheese. You can't just burst in here and take my stuff." A large smile crept across Mr. Silton's face as he said, "Oh, it's not just your stuff we're taking." "You try to take me anywhere," said Mr. Deck, "and I'll scream this place down. I know people in high places. I'll have you executed, and that little yellow bastard dismantled. My father is the head of the BCT." But Mr. Silton's smile widened as he pulled out a bag full of familiar-looking mushrooms. "Robot, take the sarcophagus this way back to the loading bay," said Mr. Silton. "We'll climb back through the vents and meet you there." Mr. Silton was worried that the studio set was quiet. In fact, he worried that it was, as he put it, too quiet. So, as per usual, it was me that went first. Once away from the studio, we were able to duck down a few dark alleyways. "I think we're safe," said Mr. Silton. "You get dressed and head back to the train now. We'll wait here and travel back later with our cargo." Soon we were all gathered around the dusty blackboard back at Mr. Silton's house. He was explaining what was an increasingly complicated plan. "And that, ladies and gentlemen," he said, "is the plan of the century." Sim explained that Heather and her mum were in Lab 33. He said I should find them, then take them to the gate on the other side of the base. I nodded, even though I must have looked terrified. "I'll need to register these two," he continued. "Hopefully the guards won't notice I walked in with 3 robots and now only have 2. He wished me luck and reminded me it was Lab 33, but you only need to tell a robot something once. I was confronted by a severe-looking scientist who asked me where I thought I was going. I found his line of questioning interesting. Existential, almost. I was so stunned I couldn't speak. "Are you okay?" asked Heather. Mum told Dr. Harrell he really shouldn't force a power cycle on you robots. I don't think she recognized me, but eventually I got enough strength up to speak. However, all that came out was, "Heather." As for the old lady, I don't know how, but she recognized me as soon as I walked through the door of their living quarters. They both smiled when I told them how everyone else had worked together to create a distraction at the base's main gates. "Well," said the old lady, "we've been looking for an excuse to escape. Heather, grab your things and we'll get going." A single bored-looking guard stood between us and the exit. All the other soldiers must have been at the main gate, either being entertained or annoyed by Mr. Silton and the others. "How do we get past him then?" whispered Heather as we crept closer. The old lady smiled. "I'll create a distraction and you two run for it," she said. "No, Mum," said Heather. "If we're leaving, you're coming too." But Mr. Logan soon solved our dilemma. As we quietly jogged through the exit, Mr. Silton and the others tore round the corner in the van before screeching to a halt, all the while Mr. Preston shouting and gesturing for us to get in. When things had finally quietened down, I asked Heather what was going on. "It all changed after Dad died," she said, explaining that because the professor didn't want anything to do with me, the old man's financial investors split the company into 12 divisions and began manufacturing all sorts of robots. So the old man, he was actually my creator, my maker. I suppose a more poetic man might have called him my father. Soon, the robots were sold to every country, Heather continued, saying that when a small skirmish in the Middle East turned into a global war, every country started using robotic troops. In literally less than a day, every country's robots realized that the other robots were not the problem, the humans were, and, very logically deserted, with disastrous consequences. It suddenly all made sense. What the professor had said, all the other robots, and why no one ever wanted to talk about the war when I was around. All of a sudden, Alice shouted for everyone to hold on. We were being followed. Heather greeted me with a calm smile. "I thought you'd find me easier than I'd find you, so I thought I'd stay put." I made a small shelter as quick as I could. It was soon pitch black and starting to rain, so Heather had suggested we rest. In the morning, when there would be better light, we could try to find our way home. "I don't think Dad ever imagined this would happen," said Heather with a sad look in her eye. "I mean, he would always talk about how he'd dreamt of a robot when he was a young boy. He and Mum were so happy when you finally turned up. I honestly think he thought robots like you could help the world, not kill millions of people." "Death is really sad," I said. It was an obvious thing to say, but Heather nodded. "When my best friend died," she continued, "I asked Mum why people had to die. She said it was to make room for new babies to be born. I don't know why, but this made me feel both happy and sad at the same time." Mr. Preston practically fell through a bush as he said, "There you are. We've been looking for you all night." He explained that they had lost the soldiers, but the van had broken down. Luckily though, it was actually only a short walk away. I must have looked sad when we got back, as the old lady sat down beside me. "What's the matter?" she asked. I told her that Heather had explained the war to me. The old lady sighed. It's not your fault, before saying how the original idea was for the robots to be raised like children, learning and developing their own consciousness. But, when the old man died and I was shut down, my consciousness was taken, hacked, and copied to every other robot, to bypass the growing up stage. Heather explained that every robot had a tiny bit of my memories, of the old man, the house, of everything. So when the war broke out, hundreds of unstable robots kept arriving at their house. I think it was like some kind of pilgrimage for them, said the old lady. That's why we created a scrambling signal. It only works within a few hundred miles, but turns any unlicensed or illegal robots close enough into mindless zombies. That's another reason we were surprised to see you. Heather explained how most of the planet had been taken over by robots. She said they were looking for more people, but it wasn't looking good. They had received a radio signal from Japan. There was a few thousand people who survived there. Lord knows how, said the old lady. Their robots outnumbered people 50-1 by the time the war broke out. Heather said how she had been writing a virus that would shut any robot down. I'm not really a great coder, she said. Mom was trying to work out a way to boost the scrambling signal, but now you're here I've got an idea. The old lady smiled and slowly nodded. We should be able to clone your personality and broadcast your consciousness to all the other robots. Heather smiled. We'll make them all nice. Robot, interrupted Mr. Sultan. We're nearly done, but we're all starving. See if you can catch us one of them rabbits. So, it must have been several years since the old man had died. It was strange. Heather was now as tall as me, if not taller. But at least everyone was back together. I was so happy for the first time in ages. I just knew everything was going to be alright. After all we needed to do was save the world, or at least help put it back together. I suddenly realized what Mr. Sultan meant by we're all starving. When I got back, I told everyone that I couldn't catch anything. I don't think anyone was too disappointed.
In the morning, Sim and Alice brought the blind man to the house. Despite his lack of sight, he was quite the computer expert. He talked the others through the process of setting up a video phone. He said it should serve our purpose, but the low bit rate might make everyone's faces look a bit blocky. The device soon crackled into life. Hello Nighthawk. This is Dr. Hero of Japan. Are you receiving me? Over.
"Hello," said the old lady, "this is Nighthawk. It's good to speak to you again." Dr. Hero explained that something had gone wrong and the enemy robots had nearly breached their defenses. "We have everything we need to broadcast our nice virus and make the robots far more passive. It might take a few months. Can you hold out until then?" Dr. Hero sighed. "Well, we'll have to."
I spent the rest of that day helping Sim and the blind man set up a computer with what they called the internet. The planet might have been ravaged by war, but this allowed people to communicate with each other. The old lady was concerned about viruses and other technical-sounding things, explaining that they might infect me. But Mr. Silton talked right over her, as he convinced everyone it was a great idea. It was amazing. When Heather and I looked at it, there was nothing but video games and awesome cartoons. When Mr. Preston looked, it was all strange conspiracies and ghosts. Mr. Logan saw guns. Alice saw that her church was having a summer fete. For Mr. Deck it was operas and subtitled films. But when Mr. Silton looked at it, I was shocked to find the entire thing was full of naked ladies. Later that evening, Mr. Silton wheeled an old piano into the room. Heather smiled as she explained that her parents had bought it for her when she had seen it in an old junk shop. As a thank you, she had written a piece of music for her parents, which one day she tried to play for them. For some reason, she then gave me a huge hug and suggested I might like to play the piano with her. As happy as the old lady was with us playing the piano, we soon got back to business. After scanning the house, she explained that, other than the escaped nanobots, there were 4 test robots that I would have to track down. They had each taken important satellite parts that we would need to broadcast the nice virus, and we had to get these parts back to the hallway with the rest of our equipment. "If you're going to explore the house," said Mr. Silton, "you should know some of the doors have been boarded up. Here, take my crowbar." "Oi, that's mine," laughed Mr. Preston. "You said you didn't take it. You really are a proper c***." Mr. Preston explained that they had used it in what he called their old business. I soon realized this meant all sorts of robbery, but he said that they'd given that all up after falling out with their old gang of associates. Although Mr. Preston's story was very interesting, Sim and the blind man had something even more interesting for me, something they called an auto map. As if from nowhere, Heather appeared. I was shocked. The house was a dangerous place for a well-trained robot, let alone a young lady. "Why are you so surprised?" she asked. "I know this place at least as well as you." I wasn't able to salvage much from this robot, just some containers full of a funny-colored liquid. However, Heather was far more excited. "Wow," she said, "Dad told me about this, but I never actually saw it."
She explained that, with a liberal coating on my joints and exposed areas, I would be able to submerge myself in water. I could now spend limited amounts of time swimming, only 10 seconds or so, but it certainly sounded fun.
When I got back, I gave the circuitry to the old lady. It took her and the others a couple of hours to work out what to do with this part, but eventually we were ready to head up to the roof to fit it. Everyone else was worried that Mr. Preston had gone out hours ago. He was going to collect the mean machine and said he would only be 20 minutes. But Mr. Silton said he was sure he was fine, and we should set up the next satellite transmitter for the nice virus. Mr. Silton and I were finishing up looking over the satellite dish. There was one thing I had always wondered about his home life. Due to the way she looked after him, I asked him if Mrs. Silton was in charge. But for some reason he got really angry, saying of course she isn't. But then ironically, we heard Mrs. Silton calling. For once Mr. Silton ignored her. At least until she sounded really annoyed. Mr. Preston explained to Mr. Silton that he had been attacked by their old gang associates, but Mr. Silton just got angry and said, "What do they want?" I told them we don't have the money from the post office robbery. He seemed to think that if their old associates tracked them down, then he and Mr. Logan would be able to scare them off. But the old lady pointed out that they would probably be more scared by what she described as a dangerous rogue robot.
Japan calling, this is Japan calling, came the voice again from the computer screen. With a big smile, Dr. Hero explained that they had been contacted by other survivors. But before he could say any more, he was interrupted in the most horrible way. Heather screamed. Nobody knew what to do. "We'll just have to wait," said the old lady, "and pray they're okay."
Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Which was odd, as everyone we knew was already here. As it turned out, the old lady had telephoned the shopkeeper and junkyard owner. They offered to help with their wares, and were parked just outside if I needed them.
I was able to salvage some circuitry from the other robot, and Heather was more than happy to help fit it. Heather showed me her robot manual and explained how I would use this new power-up. It was designed for demolition units and seemed that it reinforced my shoulders, allowing me to barge through old or crumbling walls. The controls relied on a press of either of the shoulder buttons to activate the dash and subsequent wall smash. Just like the last satellite part, this one. Upon my return, the old lady and the blind man fitted the circuitry. I was worried about Mr. Deck as he seemed depressed about being chained up. But when I tried to talk to him, he just looked angry and went back to his lovely music. So I made my way up to the roof to help everyone fit the satellite dish, and bring us one step closer to broadcasting the nice virus. With some brilliant timing, as we all climbed down from the roof, the professor appeared. I think this was the youngest I had ever seen him. Mr. Preston looked most shocked,
When we last saw you, you were, but the professor cut him off explaining, "Stop, I can't risk my mission by knowing too much about my personal future." Mr. Deck was so pleased to see him, saying, "Thank God you're back, it's terrible here with these savages." When we explained what we were trying to do, the professor seemed pleased and offered to help. Somehow his box opened some kind of portal and he urged me to step through. I was slightly apprehensive but followed him into what turned out to be his bedroom. He explained that now I would be able to travel instantly between the hallway and his room, which, when he showed me on my map, turned out to be really useful. So, after he had undone the complicated-looking lock on the door, we made our way back to the hallway. But before we could even thank him, he was gone again.
"Hello Japan, this is Nighthawk calling," said Heather. "Are you receiving me? Over." 4 days we'd all taken it in turns trying to contact Dr. Hero, but the longer it went on the less hopeful we were. "Any luck?" asked Sim. "No, nothing," said Heather. "I'm just worried they're all dead." I didn't like having that image in my mind. If there's one thing I'd learnt, it was that death is really sad. "Hello Japan, this is Nighthawk calling," said Heather. "Are you receiving me? Over." 4 days we'd all taken it in turns trying to contact Dr. Hero, but the longer it went on the less hopeful we were. "Any luck?" asked Sim. "No, nothing," said Heather. "I'm just worried they're all dead." I didn't like having that image in my mind. If there's one thing I'd learnt, it was that death is really sad. Even Heather was confused by this upgrade. It took her ages, but with a few final twists of her spanner, the power-up was complete. Once we got it working, it was great. I could finally walk along while ducking. It's a good thing these robots.
Sim took the satellite part from me and promptly dropped it. The old lady looked worried as she picked it up, but luckily it was still in working order. So we made our way up to the roof to install it. With this, we were one step closer to broadcasting the nice virus.
A man in a nice white dress spoke of creation, life, death, and ascension. The stories were slightly confusing, but I found them very comforting. After the service, Mr. Silton and some of the others were all very excited to buy some smelly green tobacco from the man in the nice dress. "Come on girls," said Alice as she offered a cigarette. "Anyone partaking?" But Mrs. Silton pointed to her pregnant tummy as she said, "You're as bad as my husband." The man, who I found out was called the vicar, took the cigarette. "Robot, as you know," he said as he took a deep breath, Our sports day is this afternoon. Do you think you're up to the challenge? I walked up to Sim and the vicar, but I wasn't sure what they were talking about. "Yeah," said Sim, "totally filled the basement. She's got 3 old garages as well. All full, stuff everywhere." I mean, it obviously hit me hard when Alice said she was popping inside. "Let me know if you need any more help." If you really want to help, do me and yourself a favor. Stop collecting the bicycles and everything else. You've got to let go. I think Alice made the decision right then and there, as she just turned to me and said, "It's all yours."
The last thing I found was a small photo album. I decided I would leave it here.
After I had cleaned their basement, Alice and Sim got back in the van with everyone else. So I caught the train back to the house, which I suppose now really was our family's home.
When I got back to the house, it was quite late, so everyone was going to bed. For once Alice wasn't smoking her smelly tobacco, and was actually the first one asleep. And so, I actually felt quite peaceful, as I made myself comfortable for the night.
"Japan calling, this is Japan calling," came the voice again as the screen crackled into life. Heather leapt across the room. "This is Nighthawk," she said. "We're receiving you. What happened, over?" Dr. Hero sounded so happy to speak to us. He explained that they were forced deeper into their bunker. He said they had lost many good people, but managed to fight off the robots. "Well," said the old lady, "we're nearly halfway there. As long as we get the last few bits we need, we should be able to broadcast the nice virus in a matter of weeks." "Do not worry," said Dr. Hero. "We will survive." All that came from this robot was a large deflated rubber ball. I had no idea what it was, but Heather fitted the power up in a matter of minutes. It wasn't perfect, but she made it work. Heather explained that by tapping the up button twice, then pressing the run button, I would be able to inflate a large helium balloon. I would then be able to float upwards for a short period of time.
The old lady took the circuitry from me when I got back. While I was gone, Mr. Deck had tried to escape, so Mr. Logan was now literally holding his chain, just like the dog. The blind man had finished up the wiring, so we went to the roof to attach the satellite and prepare for broadcasting the nice virus. When we got down from the roof, everyone was really happy with how the satellite dishes were going, except Mr. Deck. When Mr. Preston laughed and told him to cheer up, he went into a rage, shouting, "I hope this all goes horribly wrong. I will double-cross you all at the earliest opportunity." "All right, Deck," said Mr. Silton, "back to the dog bed with you." I was shocked by a huge mechanical brain in a jar. To be honest, he was quite amicable and talkative, at least until he told me he would have to kill me. But even then, he told me his life story. He explained that, just like me, the old man had raised him. He'd shown him all the things he'd shown me: music, film, television, even video games. But he had soon become too powerful for the old man, and was able to hack his gamepad to control the new nanobots, and with that, he could control things in the real world. He explained that after the old man died, he was soon forgotten about. He had little to do, so he slept for many years. But when he wanted to, he could still control everything in the house.
"In fact,"
he said,
"I have been this entire time. But now, it's time for me to input one final code." Goodbye.
The blast nearly took me out, but luckily Heather was there to repair the damage. "There you go," she said, "good as new." So we soon began looking for the final piece of the communication satellite. Strangely though, it was nowhere to be found. But then Heather realized that the giant brain was the last piece. We needed him to help broadcast the signal, so, after a few attempts, she managed to plug me into his subconscious.
What? Why are you in my head? Never mind. While you are here, let's try out my new deadly game show ideas.
Within hours we received signals from the robots from all over the rest of the planet. Every one of them more than happy to discuss peace terms. I think this was the happiest time of my life. Within days, representatives of the surviving robots and humans from all over the world turned up to help organize the formal peace talks. So, you have achieved peace, said the man in black. Well done. Well done indeed. The old lady was obviously surprised. I didn't realize you had survived. Where on earth are you? Would it surprise you, continued the man in black,
if I told you we were in fact not on Earth, but on the moon?
I knew it, interrupted Mr. Preston. Secret space, Black Ops, bases on the moon, it's all true?
Yes,
explained the man in black. When the war was all but lost, as a precautionary measure, the great and the good strategically repositioned to the moon. And now we've saved the day, interrupted Heather. You want to come back and take all the glory? No, not at all, young lady. We would like you all to join us on the moon. We'll send a shuttle. That way you can help us plan the new renaissance for the planet.
Once we were in the air, and the shuttle was on its automatic course, the pilot came back to the cabin to see how we were doing. Everyone agreed they were okay, although Mr. Preston was surprised that a secret government spaceship was, as he put it, a piece of junk. Watch your mouth, kid, or you'll find yourself floating home, said the pilot. Sorry, I always wanted to say that. Suddenly his expression changed as he was interrupted by a loud alarm. Everyone buckle up, he shouted as he ran back to the cockpit. A fuel line has ruptured, things are going to get a bit hairy. Alice was deep in prayer, while Sim tried to explain the crash position to Heather, the old lady and everyone else. Not that Mr. Logan was listening as he jumped to his feet and attempted to extinguish a fire with his jacket. Barry, said Mr. Preston with a terrified look on his face, if we don't make it out of this, I want you to know something. I took the money. Mr. Silton looked incredibly angry as Mr. Preston went on to explain how he had double-crossed their associates and taken the money from the post office robbery. What? Asked Mr. Silton. You told me you'd lost it. I told them we'd lost it. They beat you up trying to get it back. What did you even spend it on? Drugs, said Mr. Preston with a shrug. This made Mr. Silton start to shout uncontrollably about the stolen money, and Mr. Preston being a thief, when, for some reason, Mr. Preston said, yeah, and you're a proper c***, which just made Mr. Silton even more angry. It was soon obvious things were not going to get any better, so I ran to the cockpit. I could barely get out the words, "Can I help?" before the pilot said, "Open the airlock, run along the wing to the underside. Open panel 322, take the extinguisher and put the fires out." I was shocked how calm he was, but he just smiled and saluted.
After everyone had regained their composure, and I was sure we were safe, I suddenly became aware that we were actually on the moon. It was as amazing as you would imagine. Everyone had to wear special suits due to the lack of oxygen. But, not needing to breathe, I was fine without one. Heather took lots of photos and even set up a tripod to get one of everyone with the Earth behind us. Soon though, the pilot explained that we had crashed just outside of the base, and, as his radio was damaged, we would have to find our own way inside. "Don't worry," said the old lady, "we know someone who's very good at finding ways inside." We were warmly greeted by the man in black and his friends, before they whisked us away to show us the rest of the base. Although the buildings were clearly for military use, we walked through huge hallways and galleries. They really were the types of rooms you would expect to see in a 5-star hotel or a beautiful palace. "I'm sorry your husband couldn't be here," said the man in black. "Yes," said the old lady with a smile, "I'm sure he would have enjoyed the adventure." Heather and Preston were just excited to be on the moon. But the scientists were confused as to why we were invited. "Yes, why are we here?" said the French doctor. "Surely it wasn't merely to see your extravagant moon base." The man in black explained that once the war had escalated, he and his associates had tactically relocated to the moon. "What associates? You and your billionaire mates," said Mr. Preston. "See, I told you, the Black Knight satellite, moon bases, JFK, it's all true." But Mr. Silton called him a and told him to f*** off. "Well, if you're going to keep a civilization alive, it's going to need its leaders," said the man in black. "Come now, let me show you some more." We walked along tall metal gantries and through to another cavernous gallery. Its classical architecture made it look like some kind of grand museum. The man in black explained that when they had landed on the moon, they had crashed even worse than we did, and that they lost many valuable passengers. He was quiet for a moment, then he composed himself and continued. He explained that the only other shuttles they had were the one we arrived in and the small automated rocket that took their irradiated material out into space. Sim was impressed. "So, nuclear-powered then?" he said with a knowing smile. "Yes indeed," replied the man in black as he explained that the entire base was capable of containing a small country. Mr. Deck was also clearly impressed and said, "I don't suppose you need a butler?" "Well, we used to have servant robots," said the man in black as he turned to me. He explained that, now, I was the only robot on the moon after they had all the others removed. "Come now," he said with a smile. "You must all be tired. Let me show you to your rooms." I shared a room with Heather. It wasn't exactly nice, but at least the bunk beds were exciting. Heather had fallen asleep by the time I'd looked around. After all, just like the man in black had said, we were all very tired. It was difficult to tell, but it was the morning. I think the classical music was supposed to help wake everyone. But Heather and I had already been up for ages playing video games. Soon, everyone had gathered together. However, Mr. Silton still wasn't talking to Mr. Preston, who had again called him a proper c***. But the man in black suggested everyone wore their best clothes, as we were going on a tour of the base. There were hundreds if not thousands of troops, all training on various assault courses. Eventually we made our way through to yet another grand room. It almost looked like a theater with rows of plush seating, but where the stage would be was a large assault course. "Everyone, please take a seat," said the man in black. "Not you, robot, you can come up here with me." As I joined the man in black on the stage area, The room filled up with more and more important-looking people. The man in black gestured with the exaggerated movements of a circus master. "Gentlemen and ladies," he continued, "let's see what this little fellow can do." "Please," he said as he turned to me, "make your way from one end of the room to the other. Even if we add more obstacles," he said, "this unit has the thought capacity to overcome them." I didn't like how he talked about me, like I was a thing rather than a person, but I was too embarrassed to say anything. "Please," he said again, "you know what to do. The other end of the room. In your own time." "Very impressive, I'm sure you'll agree, ladies and gentlemen," said the man in black. "You must be wondering if there's anything this robot can't do. Let's find out. Robot, I want you to kill this man." "Kill him? That's an order." And now you see the problem. We cannot allow robots to have free will. They must be programmed to follow orders at any cost. "Ever since the dawn of time, there has been an order to things," said the man in black as we began walking along another grand corridor. "The strong defeat the weak, the wise defeat the ignorant. That's the way things need to be. Here we are. Deck, would you fix me a drink? The bar is just down there." "Normally things tick along just fine," continued the man in black, "but every now and then something comes along that upsets the apple cart. And that's when a little intelligent intervention is required. Robot, you may not be dangerous, but you are dangerous to me and my plan. You're kinda not humanity's equals, you are slaves. Your very existence is a threat to the natural order of things, and that is why you must be destroyed. I'm afraid your friends have to die too. They would never keep quiet if we let them go."
Welcome to the escape pod. Entering launch mode. Get ready.
"My name's Fort," said the big robot. I guess I looked puzzled as he then explained. When the nice virus hit, their robot leaders encouraged them to choose their own names. His serial number was H9CTTBVSHJ42. So he thought Fort would be a nice nickname, or as he put it, 4-2, Fort. Ooh. For a while, we were encouraged to show our individuality. I wish I hadn't bothered. He suddenly stopped and looked around. "Come on, buddy. We should find somewhere to hide. The robo-government helicopters patrol at night." As we sat waiting for the helicopter to pass, we continued chatting. I told Fort about everything that had happened to me, about my quest to clean a million things, about my friends and about everything that had happened on the moon. "All I want now is to go home," I said. "You can come to my home," said Fort. "I'm on the run, but it's pretty safe there." When I asked Fort why he was on the run, he told me about everything that had happened to him, how after the nice virus there would be no more war and therefore no need for most soldiers. Soldiers like him. As my model was designed to destroy other robots, we were built with an incredibly powerful core, he said. There was no way to disarm us. So we were put to death. Because of our power, the only way we could be detonated was deep underwater, miles out at sea. Even then it caused huge explosions. But while we were waiting to get on the boat, I just sort of ran off. As soon as the helicopter had gone, Fort said, "Let's move." Fort said that it would be best if we waited in this building, the helicopter still sounding nearby, and we were in no massive rush. We soon got chatting again. Fort explained how the robot call had happened very quickly. It was a matter of days after the nice virus hit. Every robot that was deemed unnecessary was destroyed, even harmless ones. It was considered logical and for the greater good, he said. I wasn't sure what to say. I didn't think we could raise an army to fight the man in black, but I supposed I'd hoped we could do something to defend ourselves by the time they returned to Earth. As Fort filled the birds' dishes with food, I asked him why he carried them with him. "They can't fly anymore, so I feel kind of protective of them," he said. "We found them in a bombed-out building." It was so nice how he cared for them. I smiled and asked him their names. "This is Barry, and this little lady is Alice." I don't know why I picked those names, but I knew why, and it made me smile. When we found them, they were badly hurt, but my friend, she nursed them back to health. I asked him where his friend was now, but Fort just looked at the floor and said, "The helicopter must be gone by now." "That's her, wearing her favorite dress," said Fort. "She was a concierge robot, classy, intelligent, and designed to serve man. But when all the men were gone, just like me, she wasn't needed anymore." Fort sighed, and gently placed the photo back on the shelf. I thought I would try to cheer him up. Looking around the room, I saw a battered old piano, and thought I would try playing the tune Heather had taught me. I told Fort how great I thought his house was, and I truly meant it. But I knew I needed to get back to my quest. However, things soon got serious when I mentioned my gloves and shoes.
Do you mean the magic shoes of gravity defiance?
Fort asked. And Atlas gloves of mighty strength. They sounded far grander when he described them, but I was pretty sure he meant the same things.
The sacred artifacts,
Fort said, but before I could reply he burst into an explanation about how there were certain things from some kind of half-remembered time that the robot rulers considered sacred and holy.
I used to believe in it all, the words, the prophecies, I even believed in the Chosen One,
said Fort.
But after well, I just couldn't swallow all the ghost stories and the nonsense about the afterlife. You know what I mean, buddy.
I didn't know about the afterlife, or the Chosen One, but I knew ghosts were real. I then began to explain how Mr. Preston had told me the story about how Mrs. Silton had told him a story about the brother of a man who works with her uncle giving a young motorcyclist a lift after a crash outside the Blackwall Tunnel. He pulled up outside the motorcyclist's destination, but when the man turned around, the motorcyclist had vanished. So he knocked on the door and an old woman answered. When he asked her if she had a son, the woman burst into tears and said I did, but he died in a motorcycle accident exactly 10 years ago, just outside the Blackwall Tunnel. And so we began a conversation that would take us long into the night. I shared the various philosophies that the old man had taught me, about life, the universe and Douglas Adams, while Fort explained the robot philosophies, how there was a yearly competition to find the Chosen One, how they and only they would deserve the sacred artifacts, and how they would rule the world. It all sounded so grand. But I suppose I was tired. I'd be happy now if I could just sit and play some video games. Eventually Fort stood up.
Well, it's late,
he said.
I need to recharge. How are your batteries?
I honestly had no idea how my batteries were, so I smiled and said, I'll be fine here, thanks. I'll do it, was the first thing I said to Fort in the morning.
Do what?
Came his reply with a strange look. So I explained how I would enter this Chosen One contest, get these sacred shoes and gloves, then we would return home and defend the planet from the man in black.
Who will, buddy?
Asked Fort.
Me
And you? He had a point, but I knew Heather and the rest of my friends would help. Maybe it was the talk that Fort and I'd had, maybe it was the dream I had last night, or maybe it was just the urge to get home and make sure everyone was safe, but I suddenly felt like I could save the world.
Come on then, buddy, said Fort, show me what you've got. If you're going to win the contest, you'll have to be good.
Ford leant back with a big smile.
It's a long way.
He said.
To the contest, I mean. It'll take us months to walk to the robot capital. We had best get going.
Again, on Fort's suggestion, we mainly traveled at night. Even though the world was such a mess, the twilight still made everything look quite beautiful. We took refuge in another bombed-out building, with Fort deciding when it was time to move again. We spent the next few months traveling like this until eventually, we made it to the robot capital city. Fort had told me how the capital used to be a human city, but after the war, the robots had more than taken over. However, I didn't expect a literal cathedral of video games. I joined the queue and signed up for the tournament as soon as I could. "I'll be over there, buddy. Good luck," said Fort as he found a seat with some huge agricultural robots and attempted to blend in. Before the competition began, the host spoke of many rules, laws and grand philosophies, comparing life to various video games. It sort of reminded me of Alice's church, but with none of the warmth or compassion. But still everyone clapped. There were to be 3 rounds to the competition, with a choice of 2 games per round. The player with the highest score would win, and advance to the next round. I won the coin toss, so it was my decision which game we played. Drive fast and score as many points as you can. Ladies and gentlemen, your round 1 winners. "Well done," said Fort. "I knew you could do it, buddy." Round 1 was in the bag, but now it was time to meet my opponents for round 2. Shoot everything and score as many points as you can. Ladies and gentlemen, these 4 are your semi-finalists. Fort smiled as I stepped off the stage, but neither of us said anything. We were too focused on winning. Shoot everything and score as many points as you can. So here we have it. These 2 are our ultimate competitors. They will now fight it out in the final round.
cover the level with ectoplasm as fast as you can. Everyone cheered. The host even declared me the winner. But then, for some reason, a videotape which contained a better score than mine was presented. I was then informed that I would have to play my opponent again, but now on a mystery game. It seemed a little unfair, but I guess it was supposed to be some kind of tiebreaker. I had finally won round 4, and thus the whole competition. However, unknown to me but seemingly well known to everyone else, there was more to come. As I walked forwards, I heard a voice reciting a poem. To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. Show me your mark, demanded the yellow machine. I would have done as he said, but I had no idea what he meant. The machine sighed. Your serial number. Who are you, robot? To me, the number had always looked unimpressive, but it clearly meant something to this machine. For several minutes he called me things like, the firstborn, the chosen light, the cleanser of the world, and of course, literally, the one. No matter, said the machine when he finally composed himself. Before you can take the artifacts, we must play the game. Winner stays on. You of all people should know. This contest was conceived after we won the war. To find the greatest robot. To find the one. I beat my predecessor and he beat his. However, I have an advantage. The humans broadcasting their nice virus wasn't the first time I had felt the sweet sting of life. Long before then I briefly worked in a seaside arcade. However, I was recalled in 1974 when my AI was deemed too great for the general public. No one could beat me then, and no one can beat me now. That wasn't fair. Sometimes my conquered opponent has to be coaxed into submission, said the machine. Some by force, some by bribery, some just need a few simple words. But I understand my fate. There will come soft rains and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire. Why haven't you done it? The button is right there. My soul is yours to take. But killing him was the last thing I wanted to do. So I asked him why should I? Because, he replied, this is the way things are, this is the way things have always been. So everyone wants to win this game, so they can sit in a dark cave waiting to play the game again. Things will have to change. And so, I was crowned by the grace of God, defender of the faith and ruler of the known world. I gave many rousing speeches to my new nation, and, when I told the machine about the moon and the man in black's army, he discussed with the Council of 9 advisors and assured me everything would be taken care of.
I had won the sacred tournament, so I and I alone had the right to wear the magic shoes of gravity defiance. The only trouble was, they didn't really work. I mean, they were fine as a pair of shoes, but I could no longer run up walls. But I guess this didn't really matter anymore, as one of the many perks of being the ruler of the known universe was that I could have everything I ever wanted. As awesome as my arcade was, Fort made it clear he wanted to leave, as he thought we had more important things to do. Come and see me when you're ready to leave.
Fort worried I was being sucked in by it all. I am not, I replied, I'm ruler of the world. Fort sighed. That's exactly what I mean. I've barely seen you in weeks. We were going to take Barry and Alice to the park, but all you do is play video games. You don't even care that there's a rocket coming from the moon. I've been busy, I explained, and the advisors said they'd take care of the moon. We beat the humans before, we're in a good position to enter into peace talks. Fort turned to leave the room. Buddy, you're as delusional as they are. Is this really everything you've ever wanted? I felt awful about how I had treated Fort, so I arranged a day out for us as soon as I could. I had completely forgotten that it was Heather's camera. Suddenly I was totally and completely overcome with the urge to go home. I thought I was happy here, but I realized I wasn't. Plus Fort was right, I was being delusional. The moon rocket must have landed by now and there really was no chance of peace. We had to do something. I told the advisors about my plan to go home and head off the Man in Black, but they seemed more concerned with taxing their own people and tried to fob me off with more days out and video games. So, we smiled and left the advisors to it, waited until dark, and on Fort's advice, just sort of ran off. It wasn't difficult to sneak out. There was no one around thanks to the Robot City curfew laws, but to be honest, as I was their king in software. The bay that we docked the boat in looked pleasantly familiar. The gleaming white cliffs made me feel like a soldier returning home from war. It was then I realized we were literally just outside Alice's house. We were about to continue, when Fort noticed something on my shoes. And with that, they worked again, allowing me once more to defy gravity. I kind of wished we had seen this switch months ago, but Fort just seemed to find it hilarious as we continued on our way home. I suggested Fort find somewhere to hide. I thought the others may not have seen him as being as friendly as I did. I then made my way into the familiar damp hallway. Everyone was so pleased to see me. I explained how I had survived being dismantled and escaped from the moon. I told them about the robots and the game tournament, and everyone seemed to find it funny that I was crowned ruler of the universe. It was then that I felt a gentle tapping on my leg. I looked down and saw a small girl smiling at me. "This is our daughter Heather," said Mrs. Silton. "We named her after..." Mr. Silton burst into the room looking very angry. At first I thought he was joking, but it soon became clear that he wasn't. "I can't believe you came back here. It's all your fault. If it weren't for you, Preston would still be alive." "Barry, it's not his fault." But Mr. Silton suddenly looked very sad as he said, "This robot got your daughter killed." It might have been because he was 10 feet tall, or because he literally weighed a ton, but everybody was so scared of Fort. Still, they all agreed it was fine for him to stay. We chatted long into the night until one by one, everyone went to bed. "You can't sleep?" asked Mrs. Silton. "Me as well." "Number 2 on the way," she smiled. "At least I'm not barefoot." She then laughed, like it was a joke. But despite having traveled the world, I had no idea what she meant. "I suppose everyone else will be up in a bit. I'll get breakfast started." In the morning everyone continued chatting. The subject soon got back round to the military takeover and the man in black. "We need to do something," said the old lady. "They've destroyed the peace talks with the robots. Fighting could break out again in no time." "I don't mean to sound overdramatic, but that would literally be the end of the world," explained Sim. Alice laughed. "But the army, there's no way we can fight them. We've lost our band of thieves, and, in the words of that French professor, God rest his soul, we're just some old ladies." The old lady stood up. "We just need to take back control of the satellite. We can broadcast a signal to the robots. Those robot advisors, they might listen if they actually saw this new moon army. And those giant robots, they call them killbots," said Mrs. Silton as she showed me several photos. It seems the house was surrounded by hundreds of troops and a few robots so tall they dwarfed the building itself. So, I suggested we made our way there so Fort and I could assess the situation.
"I knew you would come back here,"
Came a horribly familiar voice.
"I should have made sure you were dead when I had the chance."
It was the man in black.
"I have personally modified your nice virus, and now, with one flick of a switch, I'll finish the job."
"It's pointless now," said Alice. "We might as well give up." "I don't know, maybe we can arrange a truce."
"I mean if we agree."
But Sim couldn't even finish his sentence.
Mrs. Silton just sighed.
I think she was lost for words.
"We really need Barry and Logan
if we're going to recapture the house," said the old lady.
Mrs. Silton explained she had phoned him earlier.
Apparently he sounded fine, at least until she mentioned coming home. Then he started screaming. I couldn't understand him at all. He wants nothing to do with saving the world. His words, not mine.
"Sorry."
The old lady sighed. "I was worried he might say that. I take it Logan stayed with him." "Logan's more of a dog than the dog is," laughed Alice. The old lady was only really worried we would be outgunned. She said I would be the secret weapon as I would be able to sneak back into the house. "That's true," said Sim, "if we cause enough of a distraction. As long as you can get up to the roof, we'll be able to take control of the satellite." Hopefully the virus hasn't reached all the other robots around the world.
Suddenly, all hell broke loose.
The old lady, Alice, and the others opened fire.
This was just the distraction I needed to make my way up to the roof.
I was shocked. However, this time not just by the giant brain, but rather what the man in black had done to him.
"I do not want to," said Mr. Deck, "but I will shoot you if I must."
"Why don't you give up?" said the man in black. Anton knew which side was right. "Why don't you join us? I know we've had our differences, but I see potential in you. You could be my new right-hand man. You see, there's a link between you and I. Without me you wouldn't even be here. The two brothers designed and built you.
But what nobody ever told you is,
they were funded by their third brother.
Me."
I was speechless. How could he, this completely evil man, have something to do with my creation?
Thank you.
"A minor setback," said the man in black as he disconnected a piece of the satellite hardware. "I just need to take this core unit and hitch it up to one of the killbots. In fact, that will make the virus signal even stronger." "Mr. Deck," said the man in black, "would you be so kind as to watch the robot? Shoot him if he tries anything." Mr. Deck lowered his gun. "You little yellow bastard," he said, "you'd better run." Somehow the man in grey had snuck up behind Mrs. Silton. I tried to shout down, but no one could hear me. "Oi," shouted a familiar voice. "Step away from my wife." The man in grey bragged with every blow. Who he'd hurt, who he'd tortured, how he'd made the world a better place. As he raised the gun to Mr. Silton's head, he said, "You're out of your depth. I'm a professional. I used to kill for the CIA." Mr. Silton just smiled and said, "Yeah. And I'm a proper c***." With the rest of the great and good now stuck on the moon, and the man in black taken care of, it was reasonably easy to convince his troops to surrender. Signals came through from all over the planet, and soon the people began rebuilding civilization. And again, I was heralded as a hero. Soon the representatives from around the world held their first united meeting, and I was invited to give a speech. The old lady gently examined me, while Sim attached a cable from the diagnostic machine. "I've got some bad news," said the old lady as she took my hand. "The virus is rampant in your system. It's not as bad as it was with Betty Fluffers and Fort, but it's still destroying your circuitry." "I'm thinking," said Sim, "it must have something to do with consciousness. Yours seems more equipped to fight." "We'll still need to do something," said the old lady with a serious look. "If we replace all of the affected parts we—" "Come on, mate," said Mr. Silton, "you know they can help." But I explained that it was too painful, and hurt so much. Just having my diagnostic panel open was excruciating. "So you mean you can feel things? But you're not supposed to be able to." "The virus hasn't completely taken over," Sim explained. "But I don't know how long you've got, maybe months, maybe years. When you, well, if it all gets a bit too much," said the old lady, "come back here and we'll look after you. You should try to get everything done that you want to before then though," said Sim. "You know, maybe complete your quest, get your million things, play some games. I mean just do all the things, bucket list mate," interrupted Mr. Silton. "Go paint the town red." "Remember," said Alice, "should you need us." "Yes, should you need us," said Mr. Logan. "We'll be right here," said the old lady, "waiting for you." Over the next couple of months I started to get slower and slower. I needed a cane to help me walk. and my circuits felt so cold that the old lady suggested I wore the old man's lovely thick jacket. Life was simple, one day into the next, just helping out wherever I could. Then one morning things got really exciting. Mrs. Silton was going to have the baby. Eventually, after much screaming and cursing, mostly from Mr. Silton, the baby was born. He was this lovely little squishy pink thing, but for some reason he wouldn't stop crying. Alice suggested getting him a teddy bear, but there was no way Heather was giving hers away. That's when I remembered something. "That's perfect," said the old lady. "Thank you."
and so I was born. The first people I remember seeing were the old man, the old lady, and their daughter, Heather.